Stop here. Any questions so far? It's a lot of information.
The core competency.
Yeah, and there's slides. We'll go through each one.
I just went with core competency. I caught 3 of them: 4 top competencies: diversity, ethics, customer focus, and.
Yeah, we're going to go through each one individually. Any other questions other than the specific ones? Okay. All right. So then we looked at how we're going to use them and what we're doing so far, and then the goals we have moving forward for it. So core competencies in practice. So first we looked at how to integrate the competencies into recruitment. So if any of you have seen recruitments recently or applied to a recruitment, you'll see all of the recruitments are already aligned to the core competencies. So when we do a job announcement, the core competencies are listed in that job announcement for every position that's been going out. So that's been happening for about a year. So that when staff or external applicants apply, they can already see what's expected for that particular position. The supplemental questions will be tailored to the core competencies of the role. So there are times where, particularly in the business office or some of the specialized positions, we might have a supplemental question that's tied to a core competency, and we work with the hiring managers to identify what those might be. So, for instance, the business office is going to, for all the positions in the business office, they're going to have a core competency around financial acumen. That's not going to be needed for every position at KCLS. And so what we might do in the application process is take out one of the competencies and make a supplemental question to identify the applicants who are already prepared to live into that competency. So the supplemental questions are going to look a little different depending on the position, but each job announcement is going to list the 4 required positions. All right, good. All right, what is it? What's the framework? Why have them? How did we choose them? And then, here we are, caught up. So we're already doing this in recruitment. So the next thing we did was we looked at hiring. So what we've done is we've linked all of the interview questions to the core competencies that were decided for each role. And so we have both a database as well as some specialized resources that we use from the product line that we use for the core competency part sorts to write questions that are tied to the core competencies of that specific role. Any deviations from them are sent to HR, and we take a look at those to make sure that they still align. And it's a slightly different approach. So instead of having applicants do a recitation of their job experience, the expectation is that they give thoughtful answers to questions aligned with the core competencies. So we really actually are not trying to find whether someone can recite their experience that is listed on a resume. What we really want is to find the applicants that best match what we say we need for the role. And so all of the interview questions in there are designed to gather that information versus just a recitation of facts that you can read on the resume. We've also done, and we're in the process of doing more of this, little tweaks to the application process to enhance the applicant experience. So one of the things, if you've been on a hiring panel recently that you might have noticed, is what we'll do is we'll take all the interview questions and we'll tape them to the table that the applicant is sitting on, so they have time to read the questions, understand the questions before they're responding. That little tweak actually has had a substantial difference. It made a substantial difference in the kinds of responses we're getting back from the questions, giving applicants a little time to sit, reflect, read, versus having to remember the question frequently in subparts. And kind of on the spot be able to answer. Instead, what we really want is to generate thoughtful responses. We don't want to do a game of gotcha with our applicants. So we're going through and really, particularly in 2019, it's an HR goal to find ways to enhance the applicant experience and having questions already prepared, aligned to what they saw in the application so that they can expect to answer the things that they were prepared for is one of the ways that we're integrating the core competencies into our work.
Cynthia?
Yeah.
So do you want hiring managers when they're hiring to give the applicant? Is that something we're supposed to do every time now? Give the
We
applicants?
should be. If you're not, you'll hear from HR. So yeah, you should have the page of the questions, and we should have them taped to where the applicant's going to sit. And generally, this is what I do when I'm on a panel, and we want to continue this effort. Is I usually give applicants 5 minutes to actually read the questions and sit with the questions before I even start the interview. And then the other thing I do is before I kind of launch into it, I'll say, do you have any questions about the questions? Like, I want them to have as good of an experience as possible, because what we really want is to see if applicants actually value diversity. How can we ask questions that we can get that kind of response? Having them surprised, fearful, uncomfortable is not going to help you get those responses from applicants. So we want to make it as comfortable as possible, and an ability to think about a question before you respond is a good way to do that. Also, people have different learning styles and different communication styles. I know for me, I respond much better if I see something in writing than I do if someone, like if you were to tell me your phone number right now, I couldn't recite it to you. That's just not how I learn, it's not how I communicate. Other people are like that. So we want to be sure that we're giving people an opportunity to be successful.
So on the printed list that we would provide to them, do we list the competency and then the question under it, or we just the questions?
Just the questions,
Okay.
but usually your worksheet that you have to fill out will have which question matches which competency.
Right.
Are you seeing that?
I've hired 7 people in the last year. So
Yeah. You should be seeing that, and if you're not, then this is a work in progress. We're continuing to integrate that work.
Okay, thank you.
And stop me anytime you have a question. Are there any other questions about the hiring process? Yeah, Michelle.
So does this mean that there's not to be any other questions that aren't listed?
So I'm of a mixed mind about that.
Okay.
What you want is to give a substantially similar.
What was the question?
Should we ask questions that are not on the already prepared questions that you've been working with HR on?
Thank you.
So every applicant should have a substantially similar experience in question. That does not mean from an either equity or legal perspective they have to have the same experience. But you should do everything in your power to have a similar experience, substantially similar experience. There might be times where an applicant has a question that you're totally unprepared for, it doesn't align with the questions, and that takes you down a route where you're having a conversation about something that you're not prepared for, and that's okay. You might get really good information from that. The struggle is, from an HR perspective, is if you go off script and you start talking about things that we really don't want you talking about, like their medical status, their marital status, anything like that. So sticking to the script is important, but it doesn't have to be, as interviewers, what I want you to be focusing on from an HR perspective is getting the best from your applicant and learning as much as possible. I don't want you as an interviewer thinking like, oh my gosh, I asked a question slightly differently to applicant A than applicant C. That doesn't matter. So stay on script, but you can deviate it. I deviate all the time in my interviews. I ask pretty much the same question, but I might word it a little differently if I think the applicant's struggling to understand the question. So more, I would say, be mindful of the applicant experience than you yourself worrying that you're reading the question verbatim on a piece of paper. So for training and development, this is something that we're going to be doing in 2019 between the HR department and the strategy department, is aligning the training that's being offered by the strategy department to the core competencies, and we've already begun some of that work. But in 2019, we're going to be enhancing and supplementing what is already happening. And this helps us, so as we see the annual conversation forms start coming in, we look at particularly the internal applicants looking to promote, where they're not able to answer a question that can speak to a particular competency. What we're going to do is start looking at how training can supplement the readiness for promotion, or the readiness to advance, or just the readiness to grow in the role that you're currently in. So this is work that will continue in 2019. So probably the thing that has drawn everyone to this set of training is the annual conversation. So as kind of a preface, nothing has changed in the annual conversation in terms of the policy. So there was always an expectation that supervisors and managers meet one time a year with their staff to do annual conversations. I will tell you, because I run the statistics, that is not happening. And we really, from Lisa Rosenblum actually just last week, it is an expectation that you meet with your staff at least once a year to hold an annual conversation. But in terms of how the employees respond to the annual conversation or any changes in the approach, not much has changed other than the form. So one of the questions that I was told to anticipate before we started training was, can staff still respond? Can they still write an appeal or response to their annual conversation? Of course. Nothing has changed in terms of the policy or the approach. The form has changed and the content of the conversation has changed. And so that's the big takeaway from this. The questions on the annual conversation form are now designed to elicit a response, and both from the employee and the supervisor around the around the core competencies for each of the positions, and they're tailored to the position. So no longer is it one form that you just print off from the internet. You need to, or the intranet. You need to go to the intranet and find the form that matches the employee's classification, and I'm going to show you that. There's now a database of all of it. And then succession planning and promotion. So one of the things we've done is on the intranet page, on the HR page, is you can now see every single position at KCLS and the core competencies needed to be successful for that position. So if you have an LTA that really wants to become an AOM, employees can now, from a self-service perspective, go in and look at the competencies for an AOM, figure out where they might be needing or missing skills, then go to the training catalog and sign up for training to make them prepared for that promotional opportunity. So it's all been integrated. And then we'll continue to integrate and iterate as we go along, and particularly as we're able to offer more training that matches the core competencies. Okay, so what are the shared core competencies for all KCLS employees? I'm going to move to my paper because I cannot see that far. Okay, so the first is valuing diversity. And so in our, we use a product line to help us in this work. And a lot of agencies within King County and the greater Seattle area use it. So Seattle Public Schools has used this approach, Microsoft uses this approach, and we all use the same product line. The product line has a different definition for valuing diversity and some of the others. We took more or less what their definition of a competency is, but made it kind of KCLS. So valuing diversity is a good example of the product line doesn't really speak to delivering on a mission of the organization. KCLS has done a lot of work in defining our mission, vision, and values. So where we could, we integrated kind of the specific KCLS stuff with the definition that was in the product line. So the 4 key competencies are designed to be KCLS specific. They're not just out of the box from the product line that these big corporations use. So valuing diversity, the definition is here. Managing relationships with all kinds and classes of people inclusively and equitably. Respects, values, encourages unique dimension of each employee. Seeks opportunities to learn from differences. For this one too, we also worked with the DEI strategic work group. I always get the name of these organizational strength building project teams. So we actually talked to them about this definition to make sure it aligned with the work that strategic work team was doing when they were doing recommendations for DEI. The second one is ethics, value, and judgment, and this is a good example of where we tweaked it to be more KCLS specific. So if you look at that bottom line, you'll see defends intellectual freedom and patron confidentiality. So this was actually designed and defined before that strategic work theme group, the work theme groups were doing their work. And from the intellectual freedom recommendations, they actually recommended that all jobs within KCLS have an expectation that they uphold intellectual freedom standards. So we were already ahead of that. So luckily, we've already met that recommendation because every employee at KCLS has to have these 4 core competencies. So that's already been integrated both into the application and the hiring process. And I'll show you where it integrates into the annual conversation form. A caveat to that, though, is one of the things I want to be really mindful of is not creating barriers to entry for external applicants. So not every position, and particularly applicants into roles, are going to be able to answer an interview question about intellectual freedom. And in fact, a lot of people are not going to be able to. And so we will not be integrating intellectual freedom into every single interview experience at KCLS because I do not want to create a barrier to entry for, say, a page. A page who's applying to KCLS as an entry-level person is not going to understand intellectual freedom until they're trained in a KCLS environment to understand that. There is an expectation once they get on the job and they receive training that they uphold intellectual freedom concepts. That's not going to be something that a page is going to be able to, as they walk in the door, describe. Similarly, IT positions, business office positions, this is not something that they would uniquely understand as an external applicant. But certainly once they get into the role, the expectation would be here. Does that make sense? Okay. So the other 2 that are required for all positions are customer focus and professional and technical knowledge. The professional technical knowledge is one that you would expect, that people are prepared for the role that they're in. Customer focus is that you're focused on customer needs, able to deliver high quality value added service, strive to find new ways to increase customer satisfaction, that you're equitable in your delivery of customer service, and you foster meaningful conversations. Professional and technical knowledge, you're proficient, you have the technical skills to do the job, you keep up with current developments, you foster personal success and connections for others. Questions on those? So those now have been integrated in all the work that HR does and touches core competencies. For the managers, there are 2. Managerial courage. So this is tactfully provides direct and actionable feedback in a timely manner, is open, direct, but not intimidating, deals head-on with people and problems, even in the most difficult situations. This, too, is something that both came from all of the card sorts as a data point, a common data point. It also is a recommendation in at least 3 of the strategic work themes, is around more interaction with supervisors and managers and asking for managerial courage in certain situations. So the safe and welcoming work team had a recommendation around managerial courage. So what we did as we decided to deliver these in February is I went back and looked at all the recommendations, and I don't know any of the directors in the room, how many are there? Like 200 separate recommendations from the strategic committees. I made sure that what I was delivering to you also aligned with those recommendations as those were being launched. And then coaching and counseling. This also was a big thing coming from those recommendations, that staff really want coaching and counseling from their supervisors. So facilitating development of people's knowledge, skills, and ability to fulfill job roles and responsibilities more effectively, providing timely feedback, again going to please have your annual conversations at least 1 time a year. If you are someone who is not a supervisor here today, make sure you ask your supervisor to have that annual conversation with you if you're not already doing it. So one of the core concerns is in this change that we created a rating and ranking system or a pass-fail system. That is not the case. Each of the competencies are actually scaled to success. So even if you are rated by your supervisor, you rate yourself as a level 1, that's a development opportunity. It is not a fail. It's not rated as somehow subpar. It's a ranking of success. So they're scaled that even at level 1, you're still successful. At level 4, you are really exceeding the requirements of the position or the competency. And at that point, my expectation, if I see performance conversations coming back where someone's a 4 consistently all the time, I would ask the supervisor, are they ready for a promotion? If they're 4 in every competency over a course of many years, that would say to me this person probably has excelled at this position long enough and probably should be advanced in the organization. So they have not been changed to be a gotcha or a ding. They're really meant to be a progression of development instead of a rating and ranking scale. And I'll show you how that plays out. So for instance, for this one, this is the coaching and counseling scale. And even at level 1, you're assigned to or naturally develops others. That says you're successful, and then you move on to different sets of skills within that competency, but at no time are you ranked as failing in any